Usually when we talk about making a plan, whether it's, I don't know, orchestrating some massive corporate merger, rolling out a new software system, or honestly just trying to organize a family vacation with like a dozen relatives.
Oh, the family vacation is always the hardest one, let's be real.
Right. It's a nightmare. But there is this incredibly seductive expectation of order when we plan. It feels almost like architecture. You draft the blueprint, you map out all the chronological steps.
You assign responsibilities to everyone.
Exactly. And you just assume that everyone is going to follow those nice, neat lines you drew on the whiteboard.
Well, it gives us this profound illusion of control, right? We get trapped in this mindset of thinking that if the plan is flawless on paper, then the outcome is somehow guaranteed in reality. We kind of fall in love with the elegance of our own logic.
And it is so comforting. I mean, we desperately want things to be predictable. We want a world for you, for me, for all of us that moves perfectly from step A to step B, and then, inevitably arrives at step C.
But it never actually does.
No, it never does. I always think about that exact moment when you actually take that pristine spreadsheet, you step out of the conference room and you introduce it into the real world. Suddenly that beautiful blueprint is, well, it's virtually useless.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because you're no longer operating in a sterile vacuum.
Right. You are looking at a landscape that is deeply, deeply messy and chaotic.
Because you've suddenly introduced the single most volatile variable in existence.
Other human beings.
Exactly. Other human beings. I mean, the moment your plan requires the cooperation of people who have, their own agendas, their own fears, and honestly, just their own bad moods, you're in a completely different arena. Right. It's the absolute definition of a hostile environment for a perfect plan.
Which is exactly the territory we are venturing into today. So welcome to today's deep dive. We were thrilled you were here with us. Now, the material we are unpacking today comes from a rather unexpected place.
Yeah, it really is a unique source.
It is. We are looking at a curriculum that was originally designed as a masterclass for C2 advanced English listening practice. But, we are pulling out something much, much bigger than just a vocabulary lesson here. We're using this as a lens to look at the underlying architecture of human persuasion.
Right, because the creators of this curriculum didn't just, pick random difficult words to teach. They curated a highly specific set of idioms that actually act as a master key to understanding conflict.
So true. We are essentially decoding the language of the negotiator.
That is exactly what it is.
And that's our mission today. We are going to unpack how these incredibly rich metaphors, which, by the way, are drawn from ancient Mediterranean agriculture, Renaissance church bureaucracy, heavy industrial machinery, classical justice.
The wrestling ring.
The wrestling ring, yes. And even high-stakes police crisis management. We're going to look at how they all map perfectly onto the complete spectrum of human conflict and resolution. Honestly, these phrases are essentially psychological superpowers.
And what is genuinely captivating here isn't just knowing the dictionary definitions of these idioms. It's understanding the mechanical psychology behind them.
Right.
It's looking at exactly why they work on the human brain and what they reveal about how we handle resistance when we face it.
So by the end of this deep dive, you will understand exactly how to navigate egos, diffuse explosive anger, and change stubborn minds. And you'll be able to do it all without ever throwing a single punch or using brute force.
That's the dream.
It is. Okay, let's just unpack this. We have to start with this fundamental tension our material sets up right at the beginning. It draws a very, very sharp distinction between two roles, the strategist and the negotiator.
It's a critical distinction to make. Honestly, confusing those two roles is where so many people fail, both professionally and personally.
So break that down for us. What is the strategist in this context?
Well, think about the strategist as the person who lays the groundwork. They play the long game. They are the chess player, anticipating 5 moves ahead, optimizing the resources, calculating the risk.
I'm picturing like the classic management consultant. They come in, they look at all the data, they build a 70-slide deck, and they present this theoretically perfect strategy for reorganizing the whole company.
Yeah, and their strategy probably is perfect. But as we see in this breakdown, a strategist's plan only works in theory.
Ah, right, because of the human element.
Exactly. The moment they reveal that grand strategy to the room, they hit a brick wall. Because they haven't accounted for the fact that, Jim in accounting feels personally threatened by the new software, or that the marketing team is still holding a massive grudge from a budget cut that happened 2 years ago.
Right, because the strategist is dealing with numbers on a page.
Exactly. They are utterly unprepared to deal with pride, hidden insecurities, and just deeply stubborn rivals who actively want the plan to fail simply because they weren't the ones who came up with it in the first place.
That is so common. And when you hit that wall of human stubbornness, I think the natural instinct for most of us is often to just push harder.
Oh, absolutely.
You want to use brute force. You want to say, look at the spreadsheet. It makes sense. Just do it. You want to mandate compliance. But you can't just yell at people to follow your perfect plan and expect them to genuinely cooperate.
No, you get compliance, maybe, but you don't get cooperation.
Right. You need a very specific type of genius to get through that mess. And I absolutely love the analogy we have here in the source material. It compares the negotiator to someone who can disarm a bomb using nothing but their words.
It's such a brilliant analogy. Let's really pull that bomb metaphor apart because it works on so many levels. What makes a bomb dangerous?
Well, it's highly volatile.
Exactly. It's reactive. And it is actively counting down to a catastrophic failure. Now, what happens if you try to solve a bomb with brute force? Like, what happens if you take a sledgehammer and just smash it?
Well, it detonates immediately.
Right. You destroy the very thing you were trying to manage.
That makes total sense, so you can't force it.
No, you have to understand its internal circuitry. You have to know exactly how the firing mechanism connects to the power source. You have to know which wire to cut, and crucially, you have to know in what exact order to cut them.
Wow. And that is what a true negotiator does with human emotion.
Exactly. They aren't smashing the problem with a hammer. They are meticulously mapping the psychological circuitry of the person sitting across the table.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Well, it means that whether you are walking into your boss's office to ask for a massive promotion, or, you're just trying to de-escalate a deeply tense argument at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your family, you need these tools.
You absolutely do.
Understanding this dynamic, this crucial shift from the cold, sterile logic of the strategist to the warm, adaptable, emotional intelligence of the negotiator is everything. It is the absolute key to sounding diplomatic, but more importantly, to actually being influential.
But that influence has to begin somewhere, right? And in any hostile situation, the hardest part is simply starting the process. Which brings us to the very first phase of negotiation, initiating contact.
Yes. I want to set the scene for this because I think we've all been there. You have two sides who are just furious with each other. Maybe it's a boardroom, maybe it's your own living room.
The location doesn't matter. The feeling is the same.
Right. They're sitting across from each other. The air is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The silence is deafening, and nobody wants to be the first one to speak.
Because speaking first in that kind of environment feels like losing.
It really does. It feels like weakness.
It feels like you are conceding power to the other side. It requires an immense amount of vulnerability to break that silence because you risk having your attempt at communication thrown right back in your face.
Which brings us to our first incredible metaphor from the material, the decision to extend an olive branch. Now, I know this sounds like a total cliche. I mean, we hear it all the time on the news.
Yeah, it's a very common phrase.
But when we look at the historical and biological depth of this concept, it is just staggering. This isn't just some polite corporate phrase. We are talking about something with roots in classical Greek mythology and ancient theology, like the story of Noah.
Let's actually look at the literal botanical reality of the olive tree, because that is where the true deep meaning of the idiom lives.
Please do, because this blew my mind.
Okay, so an olive tree is not wheat. It is not some quick crop that you just scatter in the spring and harvest a few months later in the fall. An olive tree takes decades to mature and produce a viable harvest of fruit.
Decades. This was the detail that completely fascinated me when I was reading through our notes. If you are planting an olive orchard, you are making a generational commitment to that piece of land.
Exactly. You might not even live to see it reach its full potential. You are essentially planting it for your children.
Therefore, logically, you cannot grow an olive orchard in a war zone.
No, it's a fundamental logic puzzle of ancient agriculture. Think about it. If your land is constantly being invaded, if armies are marching back and forth across your fields, burning the crops and salting the earth every 5 years, an olive tree will simply never survive long enough to bear fruit.
It's impossible. So the very existence of a mature olive branch inherently proves the existence of long-term peace.
Precisely. It is the physical, undeniable manifestation of stability. It proves that the land has been free from destruction for a generation.
That is why it became the universal symbol.
Right. So imagine a chaotic, ancient battlefield. The dust is just settling, tensions are still incredibly high, spears are drawn. One side realizes they are beaten, or perhaps they just want a temporary truce to collect their wounded.
Right, a pause in the fighting.
So they send a single messenger out from the ranks, and this person has to walk across the open, exposed ground, the no man's land between the two armies, and they're completely unarmed.
They just have the branch.
Exactly. They are simply carrying a leafy branch snapped from an olive tree.
I just can't even fathom the sheer, terrifying courage that would take. You are walking into enemy territory, fully exposed to archers, and you're holding a twig. That is your only shield.
It is the ultimate, undeniable gesture of vulnerability. By carrying that branch, the messenger is broadcasting to everyone, I am unarmed. I am holding the physical proof of peace and prosperity. I am signaling a desire to stop this destruction.
And because of what the olive tree represented agriculturally, that symbol was universally recognized across all those ancient cultures.
It was a shared language of peace.
Wait, let me stop you there, though, because I really want to translate this to today for the listener.
Right.
We don't have messengers walking across muddy battlefields anymore. In our modern world, what does extending the olive branch actually look like? Because I think a lot of people might hear this and think, okay, so I just buy them a gift.
Right, but it's not about a gift at all. It's about making the very first voluntary gesture of peace or compromise to a rival, fully knowing that your gesture might be rejected.
The risk is the point.
Exactly. It is taking on the risk of vulnerability to signal a desire to end a conflict. It's, sending the email you really, really don't want to send.
We actually have a great corporate example to look at from the curriculum. Imagine two big tech companies. They have been suing each other over some patent for 3 years, just burning millions of dollars in legal fees.
An absolute bloodbath.
Total bloodbath. And both sides are completely dug in. Then a new CEO takes over one of the companies. And instead of escalating the lawsuit or hiring more lawyers, he extends an olive branch. He picks up the phone and invites his bitter rival to a private, off-the-record lunch.
And that lunch invitation is the olive branch.
Yes.
Because it sidesteps the lawyers, it sidesteps the PR teams, the strategists. It is a vulnerable, human-to-human gesture that basically says, what if we just stop?
But this scales all the way down to our personal lives, too, which I love. It could be as simple as having a massive, screaming fight with your spouse, the kind of fight where you retreat to opposite ends of the house.
Oh, we all know those fights.
Right. An hour goes by. You're both fuming in separate rooms. Finally, you quietly walk into the kitchen, you make a cup of coffee, you walk into the room where they're sitting, and you just set it down next to them. You don't even have to say a single word. That cup of coffee is the olive branch.
It really is. Because that small gesture is a suspension of hostilities. It's communicating, look, I value the longevity of this relationship way more than I value winning this specific argument right now.
It's beautiful, honestly. Okay, so the olive branch is extended. The coffee is accepted. The rival CEO sits down for the lunch. The terrifying silence is finally broken.
But now we have an entirely new problem.
We do. The bomb hasn't been defused yet. The timer has just been paused. You're talking, but the situation is still incredibly fragile. I'm assuming you can't just aggressively start attacking their ideas at this point?
Oh, definitely not. If you do that, they will instantly get defensive. The walls slam right back up, the vulnerability vanishes, and the entire negotiation collapses. You're back to square one.
So what do?
You need a safe mechanism to test their arguments. You need a way to say, I think your idea has massive flaws, without making the person feel like they are being personally attacked.
Which introduces our second tactic, playing devil's advocate. Now, I want to really dig into this one because I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with this phrase.
A lot of people do. It's very often misused in modern conversation.
Yeah. But to understand its true power, we have to look at the psychology of group decision-making.
Right. Humans are biologically wired to crave harmony, especially immediately after a conflict. We are incredibly prone to what psychologists call groupthink.
So when someone finally proposes an idea or a solution to fix the conflict, everyone else in the room tends to just nod and agree.
Exactly. Simply to keep the peace and avoid starting another fight. They just want the tension to be over.
But blind agreement is incredibly dangerous. If the idea is actually terrible, nodding along just leads you right off the cliff together. And the historical origin of how to solve this is fascinating.
It really is.
We trace this phrase back to a place you would probably least expect to find an encouragement of aggressive debate: the 16th century Catholic Church.
Which is just one of the most brilliant institutional designs in history, honestly.
Let's talk about it.
Okay, so the Catholic Church takes the process of declaring someone a saint, the canonization process, incredibly seriously. It is a massive, permanent institutional decision. And by the late 1500s, under Pope Sixtus V, they realized they had a severe groupthink problem.
Because everyone wants a hometown hero.
Precisely.
I mean, if a local bishop puts forward a candidate for sainthood from their region, everyone in the room wants it to happen. They are eager. They are swept up in the emotion of it all.
And because of that excitement, they become completely blind to the candidate's flaws.
Right. The evidence for their supposed miracles might be incredibly weak, or the person might have actually been terrible to their family in private, but no one in the room wants to be the person to point that out and ruin the celebratory mood.
Exactly. The social cost of dissenting in that room is just too high. So, to prevent this, the church did something amazing. They institutionalized the pushback.
They made dissent mandatory.
Yes. They created a specific official role for a lawyer whose Latin title was the advocatus diaboli, the devil's advocate.
I find this so compelling because this lawyer's entire job, their literal sacred duty to the church, was to ruthlessly argue against sainthood.
That was their only purpose.
They had to aggressively question the miracles, look for hidden flaws in the person's character, and just attack the evidence being presented by the local bishops.
And this is the crucial psychological nuance that we so often miss today. The devil's advocate wasn't evil.
Right.
They didn't actually hate the candidate. They weren't some heretic trying to destroy the church's credibility. Yeah. The pushback was a structural mechanism designed to ensure that the final decision was completely bulletproof.
If the candidate's case could survive the most brutal, exhaustive interrogation by the devil's advocate,
then the church could be absolutely certain they were truly worthy of sainthood.
It completely reframes the purpose of an argument. It's not about fighting to win. It's about stress testing to survive. So translating this into modern English, when we say we're going to play devil's advocate, we are purposely arguing against a popular idea.
Right. We are pretending to disagree, not out of actual malice, but to test the structural integrity of the plan.
You are basically providing a psychological safety net for the room. By explicitly announcing, hey, let me play devil's advocate for a minute, you are signaling to everyone, I am putting on a mask right now.
The criticisms I am about to offer are not personal attacks against you. They are structural tests of the idea.
But I have to push back here.
Go for it.
We all know that one guy in the office who constantly says, just playing devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to totally derail the meeting and insult everyone's hard work. I mean, it can just be a shield for being a jerk.
Oh,
right.
100%. Mm-hmm. That is the modern corruption of the term. The guy who does that is missing the entire point of the original advocatus diaboli.
Because he's making it about himself.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The original devil's advocate was trying to protect the institution, not inflate his own ego. If you use it just to be contrarian or to stall progress, you are actively eroding trust. True devil's advocacy requires immense respect for the person whose idea you are questioning.
So how do you do it correctly? In a way that builds trust instead of destroying it?
It's all in the framing. You have to validate first, and then you test.
Give me an example.
Okay, so in a business meeting, you might say, I actually think this marketing plan is brilliant, and the creative direction is incredibly strong. Mm-hmm. That's the validation.
Right.
Then you say, but let me take the mask of the devil's advocate for a moment so we can stress test this. What happens if our primary target demographic completely ignores these ads because of the new algorithm changes?
Ah, I see. Or if you're looking at a budget, you might say, I love the aggressive timeline. But playing devil's advocate, what happens if our main supplier in Asia goes bankrupt tomorrow? Do we have a contingency plan?
Exactly. It forces the group to confront highly uncomfortable realities, but without making the project manager feel like you were trying to get them fired.
It divorces the ego from the idea.
Exactly. It's a psychological buffer.
It's such a powerful tool. Okay, so let's assume you've done that. You've successfully stress tested the ideas. The debate is happening. Everyone is communicating. The olive branch worked. The devil's advocate refined the plan. Everyone is generally on the same page about what needs to happen next.
Thank you. Perfect.
But the negotiation starts to slow down anyway. The abstract ideas that sounded so great during the debate phase are now getting bogged down in the reality of the actual implementation.
Yeah, you have hit the bureaucracy. You've transitioned from the realm of ideas into the realm of action. And human momentum naturally starts decaying.
It's so frustrating when that happens.
It is, but it's an unavoidable phase of any complex process. The material we're analyzing refers to this as the gears of the conversation getting stuck due to friction.
Which brings us to the need to grease the wheels. And for this one, we are leaving the ancient olive groves, we're leaving the Renaissance Vatican, and we are jumping straight into the grit, the smoke, and the sensory overload of the Industrial Revolution.
I really want you to hold this imagery in your mind. Think about the 19th century. Picture massive, heavy iron steam trains. Picture giant, room-sized factory looms.
Okay, I see it.
You have these enormous gears, these heavy metal components, interlocking and turning at incredibly high speeds, driving massive amounts of energy.
And think about the physics of that. I mean, imagine all that heavy metal rubbing directly against other heavy metal without any protection. The immense physical friction.
It would be terrifying.
The sheer amount of heat being generated, the terrible screeching, grinding noise of iron slowly destroying iron, until eventually the friction becomes so great that the engine simply cannot overcome it.
The machine just stops entirely. It seizes up and breaks.
Now contrast that chaotic, destructive image with the incredibly simple solution. The engineer takes a bucket of thick oil or grease.
And they apply it directly onto those interlocking gears.
The transformation is instantaneous. The friction just vanishes. The machine that was screaming and shaking and tearing itself apart suddenly runs smoothly.
It runs silently.
Exactly. The energy transfers effortlessly.
It is the perfect metaphor for human systems. Because, what is friction in human terms? Friction isn't always someone actively trying to sabotage you.
Right. It's not always malicious.
Usually it's just the nature of the system. It's the stack of paperwork that mysteriously takes 3 weeks to clear at the legal department.
Yes.
It's the hesitant client who keeps forgetting to return your phone calls. It's the strict receptionist who absolutely refuses to let you speak to the regional manager. That is social and bureaucratic friction. It grinds human progress to an absolute halt.
So how do you grease the wheels of a human interaction? I mean, you can't just pour a bucket of engine oil on a client.
No, please don't do that. You use the social equivalence of lubrication. You use proactive charm. You use targeted flattery. You use small, highly specific incentives.
You are trying to reduce the cognitive and emotional effort required for a difficult, stubborn process to move quickly.
Exactly.
But I feel like we need to draw a very clear line here, because when you say small incentives to get past a gatekeeper, it sounds dangerously close to blatant bribery.
Oh, it is a critical distinction to make. Bribery is paying someone to break the rules or to do something illegal or unethical.
Right.
Greasing the wheels is about making it easier and more pleasant for someone to do what they are already supposed to do anyway. It's highly subtle and entirely socially acceptable.
Let's look at an example. Say you are in corporate software sales. You have a client who wants to buy your system. The devil's advocate phase went great, but they are hesitating right on the edge of actually signing the contract.
They're just paralyzed by some minor anxiety about the rollout.
Exactly. So you grease the wheels by saying, look, I know you're worried about the transition for your team. Tell you what, if we can get this signed by Friday, I will personally throw in 6 months of premium, 247 customer support for free, just to make sure your team is totally comfortable.
Notice what happened there. You didn't fundamentally alter the core terms of the $1 million contract. You didn't rewrite the software. You just removed their specific, localized point of friction.
You lubricated the decision-making process so the gear could finally turn.
Exactly.
And it scales down to things that don't even involve money or contracts. Think about that strict receptionist we mentioned earlier, the gatekeeper. They are a massive point of friction for you reaching the CEO. How do you grease the wheels there?
You treat them with immense, genuine respect.
Yes. You learn their name, you remember that their kid was sick last week, and you ask how they are doing. Maybe you bring an extra coffee when you show up for the waiting room.
By doing that, you are literally greasing the internal bureaucracy of that office. When the CEO asks the receptionist, hey, should I make time for this person? The receptionist, who now genuinely likes you, is going to say, yes, they seem great.
You made it emotionally easy for the system to say yes to you.
Emotionally easy. I love that.
But what if you try that and it just doesn't work?
It happens.
What if the charm offensive completely fails? You brought the coffee, you offered the free support, you learned everybody's name, and the other person is just sitting there, arms crossed, staring at you, stubbornly refusing to move forward. The gears are still completely seized.
Well, this is a pivotal moment for a negotiator.
Yeah.
You have to make a conscious pivot. You can't just keep pouring oil on a broken machine. You have to escalate.
Right.
When mild charm and lubrication fail, you must deploy mild coercion.
The timer on the bomb is starting to tick a lot louder now. The curriculum introduces our next idiom, to twist someone's arm. And to understand this one, we are leaving the factory floor and stepping squarely onto the mat of a physical wrestling ring.
Let's think about the biomechanics of a grappling match. You are locked in close quarters combat with an opponent. They're resisting you. You manage to grab their arm, you secure the joint, and you slowly begin to twist it backward behind their own back against its natural range of motion.
I'm trying to picture the exact threshold here because I feel like the distinction between twisting an arm and just snapping it in half is the whole point of the metaphor.
That is the entire secret to this tactic. You are absolutely not trying to break their arm.
Because if you break it...
Think about it. If you break their arm, yes, you have permanently destroyed the opponent, but you have also ruined the relationship forever.
Right. In a negotiation context, breaking the arm is getting the employee fired or suing the client or divorcing the spouse. You've used ultimate force and you've lost the underlying value of the connection.
You are acting like a brute, not a negotiator.
So it's about applying a very specific, carefully calibrated, steadily increasing amount of pressure. You are pushing their joint just to the absolute edge of its flexibility.
It becomes increasingly, profoundly uncomfortable. It hurts. But, and this is the genius part, the control over the pain is entirely in their hands.
Oh, that's fascinating.
They can end the discomfort at any millisecond. All they have to do is tap the mat and say, okay, I give up. You win, I'll do it.
That psychological dynamic is everything. You are artificially manipulating the environment so that the alternative to agreeing with you becomes significantly more painful than simply saying yes.
Exactly. When we translate this idiomatically into modern behavior, twisting someone's arm means persuading them to do something they initially flat out refused to do. But you achieve it through relentless, high-pressure convincing, calling in favors, or applying strong emotional leverage.
We're talking about guilt trips. We're talking about social pressure. It's intense. It can be deeply annoying for the person experiencing it, but it isn't structurally destructive.
Let's break down a very common workplace example. A manager desperately needs an employee to come in and work on a Saturday to finish a proposal.
And the employee obviously says, no, it's my weekend.
Right. Now, the manager doesn't threaten to fire them because that would be breaking the arm.
Right, that's brute force.
Instead, the manager twists the arm. They apply targeted pressure. They say, look, I know you don't want to come in and it's unfair of me to ask, but you know bonus season is in 3 weeks. The executives are extremely stressed about this proposal, and they are watching very closely to see who steps up to save this account. If you aren't here, I can't protect your bonus allocation.
Oof. That is a textbook arm twist.
It is.
It is highly uncomfortable, it feels a bit coercive, but it is incredibly effective. And the employee will probably end up coming in. And this happens in our personal lives all the time, too. Think about trying to get out of a social obligation.
Oh, happens constantly.
You've had a long week, your friends are all going out to a loud bar, and you just want to stay home in sweatpants and watch a movie. You say no.
And they don't just politely accept your no.
Never. They swarm you. They start texting you relentlessly. Come on, it won't be fun without you. We haven't seen you in weeks. Don't be so boring. You can literally leave after 1 hour. We promise. Get your coat.
They are twisting your arm through sheer, overwhelming social pressure and guilt until you finally sigh, put on your shoes, and yield.
And notice the fascinating psychological aftermath in that scenario. Very often, once the person finally yields and the pressure is released, the tension entirely dissipates.
That's the beauty of it not being a break.
Right. You might hear someone say the next day, my friends totally twisted my arm and I ended up going out, but I actually had a great time. The applied pressure achieved the desired result without permanently damaging the bond between the friends.
It's a very delicate balance.
So we've gone through a massive escalation here. We started with the vulnerability of the olive branch. We stress tested with the devil's advocate. We tried greasing the wheels. We escalated to twisting arms. But let's imagine a scenario where even that fails.
It happens.
The negotiation has reached an absolute unyielding breaking point. The pressure has been maximally applied from both sides, and nobody is tapping out on the mat. You are completely, perfectly equal. The deal is frozen at exactly 50-50.
This is the moment of maximum stagnation. This is where most deals just die. Both parties have completely exhausted their main arguments. All the big numbers have been debated. You need one final, decisive piece of leverage to shatter the deadlock.
You need to tip the scales. And the imagery we are using for this is just gorgeous. It's deeply classical, rooted in pure physics and the ancient symbol of Lady Justice holding the scales.
I want you to visualize a traditional physical balancing scale, the kind with a central pivot, a horizontal bar, and a metal plate hanging on each side.
Picture the exact moment of perfect, agonizing equilibrium. Let's say both plates are loaded with exactly 100 kilograms of heavy iron weights.
That represents the massive pressure and the massive arguments both sides have brought to the table so far.
But because the weight is exactly precisely equal on both sides, the central bar is perfectly horizontal. It is completely frozen in space. Neither side is winning.
It is a state of high-tension paralysis. Now think about the physics required to break that paralysis. Our instinct is to think we need to find another 100-kilogram weight.
Right. We think we need some massive new argument.
We think we need to invent a paradigm-shifting idea to win. But you don't.
This is the analogy that I find so profound. To break a perfect 100-kilogram deadlock, you just take one tiny weightless little feather, one single microscopic gram of weight, and you gently drop it onto the left plate.
And instantaneously, the perfection of the balance is destroyed. That single gram introduces an asymmetry. Gravity, which was previously holding everything in rigid suspension, dramatically takes over.
The entire mechanism shifts.
The paralysis breaks, and the scale drops decisively to the left.
It is such a beautiful way to understand human decision-making, especially when we are agonizing over a choice. I mean, have you ever had decision fatigue?
Oh, all the time.
Where you are looking at two options that are so incredibly closely matched that your brain just kind of short-circuits and freezes, just like that horizontal scale.
We experience it constantly. Cognitively, when we are faced with two equal choices, we are desperately searching for a heuristic, a mental shortcut to break the tie so we can just move on with our lives.
So in modern translation, to tip the scales means to introduce that new fact, that final, perhaps incredibly minor argument, or a tiny decisive factor that resolves a tied situation.
It causes the entire weight of the decision to fall heavily in one direction.
Let's look at how this plays out in the real world. Imagine you are a hiring manager. You are exhausted. You have two final job candidates for a critical role. They both went to incredible schools. They both have exactly 5 years of relevant experience. They both gave fantastic, charming interviews.
The scale is at 100 kilograms on both sides.
Exactly. You are completely deadlocked and you just don't know who to hire.
Then you look at the very bottom of candidate A's resume, down in the hobbies and skills section, and you see they are completely fluent in Mandarin. Now, the job doesn't necessarily even require Mandarin. It wasn't in the job description at all.
And it's a nice bonus. It shows discipline.
That language skill is the feather.
It tips the scales. It introduces the asymmetry, and she gets the job over someone who was otherwise equally qualified. Or think about being a consumer. You're trying to book a hotel for a vacation.
Oh, this is the worst.
You have 2 tabs open on your computer, same price per night, same exact distance to the beach, same 4.5-star reviews. You are paralyzed for 3 days trying to choose. Then you notice, buried in the amenities list, that one of them offers a free waffle breakfast.
Boom. The waffle is the feather.
Exactly. You don't even really care that much about waffles, but it tips the scales. The decision is finally made, the cognitive tension is released, and you book the room.
It highlights a truly vital lesson for anyone trying to persuade. When you are locked in a battle of titans, when you have exhausted all your major points, stop repeating your heavy arguments.
Stop yelling.
Yes, stop yelling.
Yeah.
You are just adding more 100-kilogram weights to both sides. Look for the feather. Find the small, asymmetrical, unexpected detail that the other side hasn't considered and gently drop it on the scale.
I have to ask the terrifying question. What if you try to drop the feather, and instead of gracefully tipping the scale, the entire mechanism shatters? What happens if this incredibly delicate, escalating dance of negotiation goes completely horribly wrong?
Then you enter the absolute nightmare scenario. The bomb is practically at zero.
The other person feels manipulated. Maybe they realize you were twisting their arm, or they fiercely resent the feather you just dropped. They lose their temper entirely. They panic. The rational part of their brain completely shuts down, and they decide, you know what? Forget the deal, forget the money, forget the relationship. I'm burning this entire thing to the ground right now.
Yeah. The negotiator can no longer play strategic games. The chessboard has been flipped over. They have to immediately enter absolute crisis mode.
They have to talk someone off the ledge. And of all the idioms and metaphors we've explored today, this one undeniably has the highest stakes.
It really does, because it originates directly from literal police crisis negotiation. We are talking about the development of hostage and crisis protocols in the 1970s.
It's a cinematic image, but it's rooted in terrifying everyday reality for first responders. Picture the scene. A person is in a state of deep, overwhelming psychological despair. They have climbed out the window of a skyscraper.
They are standing on a narrow stone ledge, hundreds of feet in the air, and they are threatening to jump.
I want you to think about the absolute terrifying constraint the negotiator faces in that exact moment. They step out of the window onto the ledge to be with the person in crisis. But they are completely stripped of all physical power.
I really want to emphasize this because it is the core of the psychological superpower here. If the negotiator tries to use force, if they rely on the brute force we talked about at the very beginning of the show, if they lunge or run at the person to try and physically grab them and pull them inside, what happens?
The person will panic, they will slip, or they will actively jump.
Exactly. The use of physical dominance in that moment guarantees death.
So, stripped of all force, what does the negotiator actually have left?
They have their voice. That is it. They must use pure, radical empathy. They must employ active listening and incredibly slow, deliberate speech patterns to literally, biologically lower the heart rate of the person in crisis.
Wow.
They have to exercise absolute psychological mastery to penetrate that blinding fog of panic. They have to connect with the person's humanity, validate their overwhelming pain, and convince them to voluntarily take a step backward, away from the abyss and into safety.
It is breathtaking when you think about it that way, diffusing the bomb with words. So how does this translate into our everyday lives? When we use this idiom in a business or personal context, what are we actually describing?
We're describing the act of successfully calming someone down when they're in a state of extreme panic, blinding anger, or complete irrationality. You are intervening to prevent them from making a disastrous, permanent decision that will ruin their career, bankrupt their company, or destroy their family.
I was thinking about a fantastic Hollywood example of this. You've got a multi-million-dollar movie production. Hundreds of crew members are standing around on set. The lighting is perfect. The meters are running.
Millions of dollars a day.
Right. And the lead actor, who has a massive ego, completely loses his mind over some minor issue with his costume on the very first day of filming. He throws an absolute tantrum, locks himself in his trailer, and threatens to quit the movie entirely, which, by the way, would destroy the entire production and bankrupt the studio.
Now, the director cannot yell at him. The director cannot call security and physically drag the actor in front of the camera. That's brute force.
Right.
The director has to go into that trailer, sit down on the tiny couch, and spend 3 grueling hours just talking him off the ledge. The director has to validate the actor's feelings about the costume, soothe his massive ego, absorb all the displaced anger, and slowly, gently guide him back to a rational, professional state of mind so he will voluntarily walk back onto the set.
And honestly, we have all had to be that director in our own lives, haven't we? Think about a time a close colleague was absolutely furious because they got passed over for a promotion they deserved.
We've all seen it.
They are sitting at their desk, practically shaking with rage, and they furiously type out this incredibly toxic, bridge-burning, expletive-filled email to the CEO. And their finger is literally hovering over the send button.
Sending that email is jumping off the ledge. It is total career suicide.
And you, as the friend who happens to walk by their desk, have to step in. Now, you can't just dive across the desk and wrestle the mouse away from them. You have to talk them down.
You have to use your voice.
Exactly. You have to say, hey, I know you're angry. You have every right to be furious. They treated you terribly and you deserve that promotion. But let's just take your hand off the mouse for a second. Let's just wait 5 minutes. Let's go downstairs, get a coffee. And if you still want to send that exact email tomorrow morning, I will stand right here and watch you click send.
You are talking them off the ledge. You are using empathy and temporal delay to bring their prefrontal cortex back online. You are saving them from their own destructive impulses.
Wow. When you lay all of these out sequentially like that, from the olive tree to the skyscraper ledge, it really is a complete unbroken spectrum, isn't it?
It covers the absolute entirety of human conflict resolution.
Think about the journey we just took. We started with the peaceful, incredibly vulnerable act of carrying an olive branch across a silent, hostile battlefield. We moved through the brilliant structural debates of the devil's advocate in the halls of the Vatican.
We learned how to grease the bureaucratic wheels of the steam-powered industrial revolution.
We learned how to apply the careful, biomechanical pressure of twisting an arm in the grappling ring. We learned how to tip the scales of classical justice using nothing but a single asymmetrical feather.
And finally, we ended up out on the adrenaline-fueled ledge, relying on absolutely nothing but our own empathy to save a life.
It proves a fundamental point that goes so far beyond linguistics. Mastering these concepts is about developing undeniable emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. When you truly internalize these frameworks, you gain the ability to precisely articulate and therefore actively manage how human beings interact under immense pressure. You can identify exactly which stage of a conflict you are currently in, and you can reach into your toolkit and apply the exact, correct psychological tool.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive today, and to a final, slightly provocative thought that I want to leave you with. When we were researching this, we found it fascinating to reflect on times we've had to play devil's advocate, or times we've had to talk a friend off a ledge. It is a great retrospective exercise.
It is.
But I want to push you to take an even deeper look inward at your own life right now, today.
Doing a rigorous self-audit of your own conflict style is incredibly revealing, and sometimes a little uncomfortable.
Exactly. Look at this massive toolkit we've just unpacked. Which of these psychological superpowers is your default setting? When you meet resistance at work or when you get into an argument in your marriage, do you instinctively try to grease the wheels with charm and flattery?
Or do you immediately escalate to twisting arms and laying on the guilt trips?
Or are you the one constantly holding the olive branch, always absorbing the vulnerability and making the first concession to keep the peace?
Recognizing your default reaction is the first critical step. But the real transformative growth comes from identifying your blind spots. What are you avoiding?
That is the question I want you to mull over today. What is the missing tool in your arsenal? The next time you face a deeply stubborn rival, the next time the beautiful blueprint fails and the timer on the bomb starts ticking, which of these tools do you desperately need to master so you can finally disarm the situation using nothing but your words?
It is a profound question to carry with you into your next negotiation.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly deep journey today. Keep exploring, keep questioning your own defaults, and we will see you on the next deep dive. You know, when you look at a perfectly constructed business plan, there's this comforting illusion of certainty to it.
Oh, absolutely. It's all right there in black and white.
Right. The financial projections line up, the market analysis is sound, and you've got these safety nets and contingency plans that are just mathematically guaranteed by all these algorithms.
But the thing is, eventually, that spreadsheet ends.
It always does. You have to step away from the desk, walk out into the messy, unpredictable real world, and suddenly all those beautiful projections are entirely useless.
Yeah. You're standing at the absolute edge of a cliff.
Exactly. You're looking down into the fog, and the only way forward is to just, jump.
Because that is the absolute limit of human control. I mean, you could spend years in the planning phase modeling every conceivable variable, but that modeling phase inevitably expires.
You're right.
You reach a point where data it can no longer protect you from the unknown.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we were decoding the adrenaline-fueled language of the gambler.
It's such a fascinating topic.
It really is, and we're uncovering why the most successful people on Earth routinely force themselves to the edge of that very cliff. Now, if you've been following our overarching exploration of the human experience,
which has been quite a journey,
we've dissected a few really fascinating archetypes. Like, we analyzed the calculating chessboard mind of the strategist, right? Focusing on how to position assets and anticipate market movements.
Mm-hmm. And we also broke down the psychological mastery of the negotiator, learning how to read a room, leverage human behavior, and secure mutual agreement.
Exactly. But today, strategy and negotiation are just out the window.
They really are. Because the most brilliant strategic framework and the most persuasive negotiation tactics in the world, they mean absolutely nothing if you lack the biological nerve to actually pull the trigger.
Wow. Yeah, the biological nerve.
Right. There's a threshold in corporate takeovers and political campaigns and artistic endeavors, and certainly in our personal lives, where the highest possible rewards are locked behind a door that only opens when you take a disproportionate risk.
You just have to abandon the safety of theory and step right into the arena of consequence.
Exactly. And to navigate that arena, you need the right linguistic tools.
Which brings us to our sources for today. This deep dive is drawing from a masterclass on advanced C2 English vocabulary, but we are specifically zeroing in on how we articulate high-stakes catastrophic risk.
not just everyday risks.
Right. Our mission today is to decode this really cinematic, visceral language. We aren't just looking at a flat phrase like, well, that was a risky decision.
No, we are unpacking breathtaking, heart-stopping metaphors, phrases pulled straight from Las Vegas casino floors, from the brutal economic realities of 19th century American agrarian law.
Which is wild, by the way.
Yeah, it really is. And from the freezing physics of wilderness survival and even the blood-soaked battlefields of World War II.
The sources for today's dive are just extraordinary because they highlight a really critical truth, which is that the concept of risk is deeply, inextricably baked into the human genome.
Yeah, the language we use to describe these massive leaps of faith, it's not corporate. It's not clinical.
Yeah.
It is heavily rooted in survival mechanics.
It carries the ancestral weight of life or death decision making.
Yes,
So for you listening, whether you're contemplating a massive career-defining corporate investment, or maybe you're watching a daring geopolitical maneuver unfold on the global stage, or simply facing a terrifying pivot in your own life, mastering this vocabulary is just paramount.
It doesn't just make you sound articulate, though it does do that. It actually forces you to understand the architecture of the risks you're taking.
Right. So let's start at the beginning of the risk cycle, the starting line. Let's picture a scenario where a competition is currently underway, right?
Got like a market rivalry or a diplomatic standoff.
Exactly. But right now, the baseline level of risk is comfortable, it's safe, it's stagnant.
It's a state of equilibrium. Everyone involved feels secure in their current position. And they're essentially just coasting, maintaining the status quo without exposing themselves to any real danger.
But a true disruptor doesn't thrive in equilibrium. They want to introduce volatility.
Right. They want to force their competitors to sweat, to make mistakes under pressure.
And the primary mechanism to disrupt that comfort zone is to decide to up the ante.
To up the ante. Let's establish the pronunciation for you listening. It is A-N-T. A-N-T-E.
A-N-T. Got it.
This is a foundational metaphor in the English language regarding risk, and it originates directly from the architecture of poker.
Okay, let's unpack this poker connection.
Well, to truly understand the psychological violence of this phrase, we have to look at the structural mechanics of the game. So, in poker, before a single card is dealt to the table.
Before you even know if your hand is good.
Exactly. Before you have any mathematical idea if you possess a winning or losing hand, every single player is mandated to put a small, fixed amount of money into the center pot.
Just for the privilege of sitting in the chair.
Yes. It is a forced tax on your existence in that space.
Yeah.
You literally have to pay just to perceive the game.
Wow.
And that mandatory initial bet is the ante. In game theory, the purpose of an ante is to prevent a stagnant equilibrium.
Because without it, you could just sit there forever, right?
Exactly. Without an ante, a highly conservative player could just sit at the table for hours, folding every single hand for free, waiting until they're dealt the mathematically perfect cards.
Right, so the ante penalizes cowardice.
Yes, it ensures that sitting still costs you money. Now, if a dominant player wants to shake the tree, if they want to accelerate the game and see who actually has the capital to survive, they will demand that the structural baseline be increased. They up the ante.
And instantly, the environment mutates.
The cost of mere participation becomes dangerous.
Okay, let me stop you there, because the implications of that in a business context are just massive. You aren't just making a bet on your own success, you're actively weaponizing the cost of capital against your opponent.
That is a great way to put it.
It's like, okay, imagine everyone is running a marathon at a comfortable pace, and suddenly you possess the power to mandate that every single runner must immediately strap on a 40-pound weight vest.
Right.
You're forcing your competitors to carry a heavier financial or operational burden just to stay on the track.
That is the exact mechanism at play. In advanced English, to up the ante means to unilaterally escalate the demands, the financial stakes, or the required level of commitment in a competitive environment.
You draw a line in the sand.
Right. You draw a line that says the price of tomorrow is double the price of today. You force everyone else to make an agonizing choice. Adapt to my new expensive reality, or pack up your chips and forfeit your position in the market entirely.
Our source material points to the tech industry for a brilliant real-world application of this. Think back to a few years ago. A major rival tech company released the world's first truly waterproof smartphone.
Oh yeah, that changed everything.
It did. Prior to that morning, maybe slight splash resistance was a novelty, but nobody was casually dropping their $1,000 devices into the ocean.
Definitely not.
But the second that waterproof phone hit the global market, That company completely upped the ante for the entire mobile ecosystem.
Because once the consumer expectation shifts to include that new feature, the baseline has moved. The competitors can no longer release their standard non-waterproof models and expect to maintain their market share.
The cost of simply sitting at the table, the ante, has skyrocketed.
Right. If the rival corporations don't match that new, highly technical feature, they become obsolete overnight. They are forced to instantly absorb massive, unforeseen research and development costs, retool their entire manufacturing supply chains.
Just huge operational risks.
Immense risks, merely to stay relevant. The primary aggressor has successfully externalized their pressure onto the entire industry.
But wait, doesn't that backfire? If you're the one upping the ante, you are also forcing yourself to pay that higher cost.
You are.
If you set a new, incredibly expensive industry standard, you're bleeding your own capital dry as well. Doesn't the psychological sting wear off if everyone knows you are bleeding just as heavily?
That is the brilliant danger of the move. You only up the ante when you possess asymmetric resources. You do it when you know you have the capital reserves to survive the new weight vest, and you've calculated that your opponent does not. It is a financial war of attrition disguised as innovation.
Okay, so the ante is up. The baseline pressure in the room is immense. It is suddenly incredibly expensive just to breathe in this market.
Exactly.
And this is exactly where the psychological warfare shifts from structural pressure to interpersonal deception. Let's imagine the ante has been raised to an agonizing level. One of your opponents looks across the boardroom table. They don't have the capital to compete, but instead of folding, they look you dead in the eye and make a catastrophic threat. They claim they have a secret technology or a hidden investor that is going to entirely crush your business. But you analyze the situation. You look at the macroeconomic environment, you read their microexpressions, and you deduce that they are terrified.
Their threat is a mirage.
Right. So you decide to call their bluff.
We are staying right at the poker table for this idiom, but we're moving deeply into the realm of behavioral economics and signaling theory.
What's fascinating here is how the power dynamics completely flip. Right?
Oh, entirely. A bluff, fundamentally, is a weaponized lie. In poker, it occurs when a player holds a terrible, mathematically worthless hand of cards, but they deliberately bet a massive, wildly intimidating amount of money.
Their sole objective is to hijack the nervous systems of their opponents.
Yes. Tricking them into believing they hold an unbeatable hand.
They're trying to project a reality that doesn't exist. They want you to experience the exact fear that they are secretly suppressing.
Exactly. They want you to look at your own solid, profitable hand, second-guess your own reality, and surrender out of self-preservation.
It's just a pure exploitation of human risk aversion.
It is. The bluffer knows their only possible path to victory is through your psychological collapse. However, if you possess the emotional regulation to absorb that fear and the analytical insight to recognize the inconsistencies in their story, you can look at them and say, I reject your reality. Show me your cards.
Wow.
In that moment, you are calling their bluff. You strip away the theatrical illusion. By forcing them to provide empirical evidence of their threat, you instantly neutralize their power if they are lying.
Idiomatically, to call someone's bluff means to challenge an opponent to execute their threat because you possess a high degree of confidence that they are exaggerating, deceiving you, or simply lack the operational capacity to actually pull the trigger.
Right.
The masterclass source outlines this fantastic high-tension corporate scenario. Imagine a critical supplier threatens a CEO during a supply chain crisis.
Okay.
The supplier states, if you do not agree to a 20% price increase today, we are permanently canceling your contract and shutting down your assembly line.
A massive threat.
It's massive. Now, standard negotiation tactics would dictate panic or at least a frantic attempt to compromise at, say, 10%. But this CEO, they don't negotiate. They look at the supplier and calmly say, go ahead, terminate the contract right now.
And the result?
The supplier instantly deflates and backs down. They were bluffing. They were over-leveraged and needed the CEO's revenue far more than the CEO needed their parts.
See, that requires an almost terrifying level of composure, because it forces us to address the elephant in the room, what happens when your analysis is flawed.
That is exactly the friction point I want to explore. How do you actually know? In a complex system, how do you differentiate between a desperate competitor bluffing for survival and a quiet juggernaut who actually has the power to systematically dismantle your life?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because if you smugly call the bluff of someone who actually holds the winning cards, you haven't just lost a negotiation, you've basically initiated your own execution.
And this is why calling a bluff is never a sterile mathematical certainty. It is the epitome of high-stakes gambling. It relies heavily on Bayesian inference, updating your probability estimates based on behavioral tells.
Right. You're analyzing the velocity of their threat.
You're looking for desperate microexpressions or utilizing asymmetric market intelligence to realize that executing their threat would trigger mutually assured destruction, hurting them more than it hurts you.
Right.
John von Neumann, the father of game theory, actually proved that bluffing isn't just a psychological trick. It's a mathematical necessity in any game with hidden information.
Wait, really? A necessity?
Yes. If you never bluff, you become entirely predictable, and predictable entities are easily destroyed. But calling a bluff means accepting the very real, visceral possibility that your cognitive model of the world was wrong, and you were entirely willing to absorb the catastrophic damage if it was.
It is the moment the tension in the room either snaps or just explodes in your face.
Exactly.
So we forced the action by upping the ante, and we've navigated the deceptive warfare of calling bluffs. But let's follow the logical chain of events. What happens when you call a bluff and you are spectacularly wrong?
Oh boy.
Or what happens when you launch a product and the market vehemently rejects it? Your colleagues, your board of directors, the data, everything tells you that your hypothesis was a disaster.
The logical strategic move there is to apologize, cut your losses, and pivot.
But human ego is a powerful, dangerous engine. Instead of retreating, you lock your jaw. You dig your heels in. We are moving from the calculated deception of the poker felt to the rigid binary trap of the blackjack table. You decide to double down.
Here is where the psychology of risk takes a dark, incredibly complex turn into cognitive dissonance. To understand doubling down, we must look at the strict, unforgiving mechanics of casino blackjack.
Okay, lay it out for us.
In this game, you're initially dealt 2 cards, and your objective is to accumulate a higher numerical value than the dealer without exceeding 21. Occasionally, you are dealt a highly advantageous starting hand.
Like an 11.
Exactly. When this mathematical advantage presents itself, the dealer offers you a terrifying high adrenaline proposition. Right in the middle of the hand, before anything else happens, you are permitted to double the physical size of your original financial wager.
You can just slide twice as much capital into the betting circle, amplifying your exposure instantly?
Yes, but, and this is crucial, the casino does not give you that opportunity for free. There is a massive structural catch.
Wait, what's the catch?
If you invoke the right to double down, the rules strictly dictate that you are only permitted to receive exactly 1 additional card.
Just 1.
That is the absolute limit. No matter what that 3rd card is, even if it is a terrible card that leaves you vulnerable, your turn is immediately and permanently over.
Wow. You know, I always thought doubling down just meant trying twice as hard or being extra persistent. I completely missed the nuance that it inherently requires the sacrifice of optionality.
It changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
It changes everything. You aren't just betting more money. You are consciously trading away your ability to maneuver. You're looking at a massive potential payout. But to access it, you are completely locking yourself into a rigid trajectory. You surrender the ability to adapt.
Precisely. You are exchanging flexibility for leverage. In the real world, in corporate governance, in geopolitics, in ideological debates, to double down means to aggressively reinforce your commitment to a specific strategy, a controversial belief, or a failing course of action, especially when you are confronted with heavy criticism, intense pushback, or direct empirical evidence that you are failing.
You just refuse to pivot.
Instead, you pour even more capital, time, and reputation into your original thesis.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The masterclass source provides a polarizing example of this in the realm of public relations.
Oh, the commercial example.
Yes. Imagine a massive global corporation releases a highly controversial television advertisement. The public backlash is immediate and vicious. Social media is ablaze, consumer groups are organizing boycotts, and the stock price begins to dip.
A nightmare scenario for a PR team.
Exactly. The standard, safe public relations playbook dictates that the CEO issues a sterilized apology and pulls the ad from the airwaves. But this particular executive team, they double down.
They lean into it.
Right. Instead of retreating, they authorize the expenditure of another $5 million to buy premium airtime, broadcasting that exact same controversial advertisement during the Super Bowl.
It's almost unbelievable.
They are communicating to the market. We are not wrong, you are. and we are going to leverage even more of our corporate treasury to force you to accept our stance.
It is a spectacular, almost arrogant display of commitment. But it forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable question about human psychology.
Which is?
What is the actual structural difference between doubling down as an act of visionary leadership and doubling down as an act of pure, destructive stubbornness?
Man, that is the ultimate test of leadership, isn't it? Because society worships the visionaries who doubled down and won.
We absolutely do.
We idolize the tech founders who were laughed out of Silicon Valley boardrooms, told their software was impossible, but they mortgaged their homes, alienated their families, and pushed forward anyway, eventually building trillion-dollar empires. We labeled them historical geniuses.
But for every visionary, there are 1,000 executives who fall victim to the sunk cost fallacy.
Right?
The sunk cost fallacy is the psychological poison that infects the double down. It is a cognitive bias where an individual or an organization continues to invest immense resources into a clearly failing endeavor, not because the future outlook is positive, but simply because they have already invested so much historical effort into it.
They just can't let it go.
They cannot tolerate the psychological pain of admitting that their initial investment was a total loss.
So they throw good money after bad. It becomes an ego defense mechanism rather than a strategic decision.
A prime historical example is often referred to in economics as the Concorde fallacy. The British and French governments partnered to build the Concorde supersonic jet. Long before the plane ever flew commercially, it became glaringly obvious that the fuel economics were disastrous and it would never be profitable.
But they kept going.
Because both governments had already spent billions, and because their national pride and political egos were inextricably tied to the project, they doubled down. They poured billions more into a machine they knew was financially doomed, purely to avoid the humiliation of canceling it.
Wow.
When a leader doubles down out of a refusal to accept a blow to their ego, they lose their single card, they lose their flexibility, and they can bankrupt entire nations or corporations.
It is a razor-thin line between holding a brilliant conviction and suffering from a delusional obsession. And that psychological trap brings us perfectly to the immediate environmental aftermath of a double down.
Because the safety of the casino is gone.
Exactly. Once you have doubled down, once you have permanently sacrificed your flexibility, burned through your capital, and tied your entire survival to the singular, unchangeable outcome, the world around you changes fundamentally. You are no longer operating in the sterile, controlled, mathematical environment of a casino.
The casino doors have been blown off their hinges. You are completely exposed to the elements.
You are out in the wild. Which brings us to our next phase of the risk cycle, the danger zone. When you double down and it doesn't immediately pay off, your margin for error completely evaporates.
It's terrifying.
You have stepped out of the boardroom and into the freezing, unforgiving winter wilderness. You are now skating on thin ice.
The skate on thin ice. If you want to understand the biology of risk, this idiom paints one of the most vivid, visceral sensory pictures in the English language.
Just thinking about it gives me anxiety.
I want you listening to close your eyes and imagine you are ice skating across a vast frozen lake in the dead of winter. If the ice beneath your blades is thick, say, a foot of solid frozen water, you possess total freedom of movement.
You can glide, you can sprint, you can fall down, and you are perfectly physically safe. The environment is absorbing your mistakes.
But let's say you glide further away from the shore. You aren't paying attention, or perhaps you intentionally push the boundaries, and you enter an area where the ice is only a fraction of an inch thick.
Oh no!
The entire physical atmosphere shifts in a microsecond. You hear this sound, this terrifying, sharp, spider-webbing crack echoing right beneath your steel blades.
Oh God, just imagining that sound. The human physiological response to that is instantaneous. Your amygdala floods your nervous system with cortisol and adrenaline. Time dilates.
Exactly. The ice beneath you is barely miraculously supporting the current distribution of your body weight. You realize with absolute horrifying clarity that the environment is no longer protecting you. It is actively waiting to consume you.
If you make one sudden, jerky movement, if you shift your center of gravity too quickly, or even if you simply stand paralyzed in one single spot for too long, allowing your concentrated weight to press down on that fragile surface, the ice will shatter.
And you will plunge into the freezing, pitch-black water below. Survival becomes a matter of seconds.
I want you listening to really internalize the anxiety of that cracking sound. Imagine the sensation of having the illusion of control ripped away from you. You are balancing on a microscopic razor's edge.
It is the ultimate state of environmental precarity.
Idiomatically, In advanced English, to skate on thin ice means to operate within a highly dangerous, extremely delicate situation where you are separated from total disaster by a fraction of a millimeter. One tiny operational misstep, one minor miscalculation will trigger an unrecoverable collapse.
It perfectly articulates the terrifying reality of operating with absolutely zero margin for error. The masterclass materials provide two distinct applications of this precarity: systemic risk and interpersonal precarity.
Let's start with systemic risk.
First, let's examine it through the lens of organizational behavior. The source describes a commercial construction crew that is heavily behind schedule. To avoid massive financial penalties, the site manager decides to systematically ignore fundamental safety regulations.
They skip the secondary load-bearing tests.
They bypass the equipment cool-down protocols. And they might successfully build the structure for a day or even a week without an incident.
But they are skating on incredibly thin ice.
Exactly. In sociology, this is known as the normalization of deviance, a term coined by Diane Vaughan when studying the Challenger space shuttle disaster.
Right, because they accept the thin ice as normal because they haven't fallen in yet.
Yes, but the disaster is no longer a mere possibility. It is a mathematical inevitability waiting for the slightest trigger. The ice is already cracking under the weight of their negligence.
The second example from the text is highly relatable, focusing on interpersonal precarity. It's about an employee, let's call him Mark.
Poor Mark.
Yeah. Mark has a history of poor performance, and this week he has been late to the office 3 times. Mark is skating on extremely thin ice with his executive leadership.
His boss might not formally fire him today, but Mark has entirely exhausted his reservoir of goodwill.
If Mark is even 60 seconds late tomorrow morning, or if he forgets to CC a client on a single email, the ice shatters. The termination is immediate. He has placed himself in a position where perfection is the only acceptable metric for survival.
If we synthesize this, what makes skating on thin ice such a profound metaphor is that it almost always describes a scenario where the individual is acutely aware of their danger.
They hear the ice cracking.
Their nervous system is screaming at them. But they have maneuvered themselves into a strategic corner where they cannot simply turn around and sprint back to safety without triggering the collapse they are trying to avoid.
They're trapped.
They are trapped in a state of hypervigilance, forced to keep moving forward very, very smoothly, praying they reach solid ground before the structural integrity fails entirely.
It is pure exhausting survival mode. The prefrontal cortex is basically shutting down, and you are operating entirely on instinct. But let's draw a massive contrast here. Because skating on thin ice often feels like a state of precarity that you either accidentally drifted into or a situation created by a gradual, lazy erosion of your safety protocols.
Right, it's often passive.
But what about the deliberate, conscious, heart-stopping choice to willingly walk out onto that ice? What about the moment you look at the risk, acknowledge the terrifying mathematics, and voluntarily choose to wager absolutely every single asset you possess on one binary outcome?
Now we're reaching the peak.
We are leaving the realm of accidental precarity. We are moving into the final, absolute stages of the human risk cycle, the ultimate wagers. We were talking about betting the farm.
To bet the farm. To grasp the historical gravity of this idiom, we have to completely remove ourselves from the modern world. We leave the casino, we leave the frozen lake, and we are transported back in time to the agrarian reality of 19th century America.
Which is such a specific setting for an idiom.
It is. This is an incredibly dramatic, high-stakes metaphor, but it only resonates if you understand what property ownership represented during that era, particularly following legislation like the Homestead Act of 1862.
Right, because to a modern listener, a farm is just a piece of commercial real estate. If a modern agricultural corporation goes bankrupt, they file Chapter 11, restructure their debt, and the CEO goes to work somewhere else.
But that is entirely disconnected from the origin of this phrase.
Completely disconnected.
In the 1800s, a farm was not merely a business. It was the absolute singular anchor of a family's existence in the universe. It was their physical shelter from the element.
It was their sole mechanism for generating caloric energy to survive the winter.
More importantly, it was their only form of generational leverage. The deed to that land was the only tangible asset they had to pass down to ensure their children wouldn't starve in the next century.
So let's map this onto the psychology of risk. Imagine a homesteader in the 19th century. He has suffered a catastrophic year. Severe drought has decimated the crops. Or perhaps a localized economic collapse has wiped out his cash reserves.
His family is facing the very real biological threat of starvation as winter approaches.
Out of sheer desperation, he travels into the nearest town and sits down at a high-stakes gambling table. He is attempting to win enough capital to buy seed and survive the season. But the game escalates.
He runs out of liquid currency.
The pile of money in the center of the table is massive. He looks at his hand, and he believes, with every fiber of his being, that he holds the winning cards. In a moment of absolute breathtaking psychological extremity, he reaches into his coat, pulls out the legally binding paper deed to his entire farm, the physical embodiment of his family's past, present, and future, and pushes that piece of paper into the center of the table.
The stakes he has just created are entirely binary. It is a catastrophic 1 or 0 outcome.
Win or lose everything.
If his calculation is correct and he wins, he secures immense life-altering wealth and guarantees his family's survival for a decade. But if his calculation is wrong, the devastation is absolute. He and his family are instantly, irrevocably evicted into the wilderness. They are destitute.
Idiomatically, in modern English, to bet the farm means to willingly risk absolutely everything you own. Your entire life savings, your professional reputation, your accumulated equity, your entire livelihood on one single highly volatile venture.
This connects directly to the tech entrepreneur archetype we referenced earlier.
Oh, yeah.
The masterclass source details a founder who's developing a revolutionary artificial intelligence software. They pitch venture capitalists, but the VCs want too much equity or don't believe in the vision.
So instead of accepting defeat or scaling back the project, the founder decides to bet the farm.
They don't just take out a manageable small business loan. They sell their family home and move into a cramped apartment. They liquidate their children's college fund.
They empty their retirement accounts, incurring massive tax penalties.
They pour every single cent of their personal net worth and their entire professional reputation into funding this software code.
Or consider a renowned chef who abandons a stable, highly lucrative position at a Michelin-starred restaurant, cashes out their entire life's work, and takes on crippling personal debt to open an incredibly niche, avant-garde restaurant concept in a highly volatile, unpredictable market.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, analyzing it through the lens of behavioral biology, what is truly compelling about betting the farm is how it fundamentally alters the neurochemistry of the person taking the risk.
I want to push back on that for a second. Is that actually a good thing?
How do you mean?
Well, society loves the story of the entrepreneur who risked it all and became a billionaire. But that feels like massive survivorship bias. We never hear the stories of the 10,000 founders who bet the farm, lost, and destroyed their family's financial futures.
That's very true.
Is betting the farm ever actually a sound strategy, or is it just a glorified act of desperation?
That is the perfect critique. Mathematically, it is almost always a terrible strategy. Financial advisors build their entire careers on the concept of diversification specifically to prevent you from betting the farm.
Right.
However, when we look at extreme outliers, the people who actually change paradigms, we find a bizarre biological mechanism at play. When you operate with a safety net, even a subconscious one, your brain naturally diverts a percentage of its cognitive bandwidth toward calculating the fallback plan.
You hold a reserve of energy.
Exactly. But when you bet the farm, when you push the deed into the center of the table and burn your boats on the shore, your brain recognizes that failure equals annihilation. The safety net is gone.
And what does that do to you?
This existential threat triggers a state of absolute hyper-focused flow. It unlocks a level of desperate creativity, endurance, and operational drive that is physically impossible to access when you are comfortable. You perform at the absolute limit of your human capacity because the alternative is death.
You literally engineer a scenario where you cannot afford to fail, forcing yourself to evolve. Which brings us to the ultimate climax of this language of risk. Because once you have bet the farm, once the material risk is at its absolute maximum and all your capital is deployed, you still have to execute the plan.
You can't just sit back and watch.
No. You must unleash every single ounce of energy in your physical body and your spirit to secure the victory. You have to go for broke.
To go for broke. This is, without a doubt, one of the most spectacular, emotionally resonant idioms in the English language, largely because of the heavy, legendary historical weight it carries.
Where did it actually come from?
Linguistically, its roots are relatively casual. It originated as localized slang in Hawaii, used frequently in street dice games. It quite literally meant to wager everything on a single roll, to play aggressively until you are completely broke.
But a phrase born in a dice game doesn't usually command the kind of deep reverence this one does. That casual slang is not how it entered the global lexicon.
No, it wasn't. It was baptized in fire on the battlefields of World War II. Go for broke was elevated from a gambling phrase to a sacred vow when it was adopted as the official motto of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team of the United States Army.
The 442nd.
Now, the sociological and historical context of this regiment is absolutely essential to understanding the idiom. This unit was composed almost entirely of Nisei second-generation Japanese-American soldiers.
And we have to remember the domestic reality for these men. They were volunteering to fight for the United States during a period when their own country was subjecting their families to severe institutionalized racism.
It was an incredibly dark time.
Many of these soldiers enlisted while their parents and siblings were actively incarcerated in American internment camps behind barbed wire.
Exactly. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They were preparing to bleed and die for a government that actively mistrusted, stripped the rights of, and imprisoned their own blood relatives.
Yeah.
The emotional, psychological, and spiritual burden these soldiers carried is almost unimaginable to a modern citizen. So when they chose "Go for broke" as their regimental motto, it wasn't just a catchy piece of bravado. It was a solemn existential declaration.
It meant they were making the ultimate wager. They were going to put absolutely everything, their bodies, their futures, their very lives on the line.
Yes.
They were launching a final, all-or-nothing offensive to prove their loyalty beyond any shadow of a doubt and to achieve total victory against fascism in Europe. They were betting their lives to buy freedom for their families back home.
And they executed that motto with a ferocity that stunned the world. They fought with a level of commitment that was unparalleled, completely disregarding the mathematical probability of failure or the option of retreat.
The rescue of the Lost Battalion comes to mind.
A famous, heartbreaking example. In the Vosges Mountains, where they suffered catastrophic casualties to save a trapped Texan unit. Because of their sheer, terrifying willingness to sacrifice everything they had, the 442nd became one of the most highly decorated units for its size and length of service in the entire history of the United States military.
Wow.
They proved that when human will is pushed to the absolute brink, it can shatter mathematical probabilities.
So what does this all mean when we transition this back to our own lives? When we use this phrase in modern, high-level English, it carries that echo of total commitment.
Right.
We discussed how betting the farm represents the ultimate material and financial risk, but going for broke represents the ultimate physical and spiritual exertion.
Yes, it means deliberately exhausting all of your reserves. It means putting absolutely every last ounce of effort, adrenaline, time, and intellectual resource you possess into a final desperate push to succeed.
It is the conscious decision to hold nothing back for the journey home.
The masterclass gives a highly relatable example in the realm of sports. Imagine a high-stakes championship soccer match.
Okay.
There are only 10 minutes left on the clock, and your team is down by one goal. The coach on the sidelines makes the tactical decision to go for broke. What does that actually look like on the field?
It means abandoning the balanced equilibrium of the game.
Exactly. The defenders sprint up the field. Even the goalie abandons the safety of the net to join the attack in the penalty box. You commit every single player to the offensive strike.
By doing so, you leave yourself completely, fundamentally vulnerable to a counterattack.
But you do it because the context dictates that losing by 2 goals is functionally identical to losing by 1. You willingly abandon all defensive posture for one final, hyper-concentrated chance at securing the victory.
Or translate that into a high-pressure corporate setting. It's the engineering team staring down an impossible company-defining deadline. They have 1 week left to finalize the software architecture that will either secure their next round of funding or result in the bankruptcy of the firm.
They look at the sheer volume of work left, and they decide to go for broke.
They cancel their weekend plans, they set up cots and sleep under their desks, they consume nothing but caffeine and adrenaline, working in a state of manic flow through the night.
They aren't just working hard. They're pouring their literal life force, their health, and their sanity into the project, risking burnout and physical collapse for the chance to push the code across the finish line.
It is the ultimate expression of human will overriding the instinct for self-preservation.
It truly is.
It gives me chills just thinking about the sheer scale of human capability when we are pushed to that edge. We have just charted the most incredible, pulse-pounding anatomy of human risk today. We didn't just look at a list of words, we mapped the escalating biology of a gamble.
From start to finish.
We started by artificially escalating the tension in a stagnant room, by upping the ante to weaponize capital, and by calling a bluff to pierce through the psychological deception of our opponents.
Then we examined the terrifying trap of our own egos, cementing our positions, and sacrificing our flexibility by doubling down.
We navigated the visceral, cortisol-soaked fallout of those rigid choices while skating on thin ice. And finally, we explored the mechanics of making the ultimate leaps of faith, burning our material safety nets by betting the farm, and exhausting our spiritual reserves by going for broke.
It is a profoundly powerful vocabulary, and the true value of mastering these idioms is not just passing an English exam.
Definitely not.
When you deploy this language in your own life, whether you're framing a pitch in a boardroom, contextualizing a crisis for your team, or just telling a compelling story at a dinner party, you instantly command the psychological attention of the room. You signal to everyone listening that you possess a deep, nuanced, and mature understanding of the brutal weight of consequence.
And I know that you listening right now have your own adrenaline-filled stories. You don't have to be a CEO or a soldier to experience this. You've had moments where you had to double down on a personal relationship against the advice of your peers. You've had moments where you called an employer's bluff during a salary negotiation and watched the entire power dynamic instantly invert. We all have these quiet, terrifying moments where we have to take a fearless leap into the fog.
Because navigating the architecture of risk is not an elective course. It is an unavoidable, fundamental requirement of the human experience.
Which leaves me with one final lingering thought for you to chew on as you step away from this audio and back into your own life. Today, we thoroughly analyzed how doubling down requires the dangerous sacrifice of flexibility in pursuit of a massive payout.
And we discussed how going for broke demands that we intentionally blind ourselves to the very possibility of failure in order to access our highest, most desperate level of effort.
Both actions require a radical, almost irrational suspension of disbelief.
Right.
So here's the question you need to ask yourself. At what exact point does a highly calculated, meticulously modeled strategic risk stop being a strategy at all and simply mutate into blind faith? Is it possible that no matter how much of a calculating strategist or a master negotiator we train our minds to be true, world-changing success ultimately always requires us to eventually close our eyes, ignore the spreadsheets, and bet the farm on our own untested potential?
That's a phenomenal, haunting question. Where exactly does the math end, and where does the leap truly begin?
Something to seriously mull over the next time you find yourself standing at the edge of that course, listening to the ice crack. Thank you so much for joining us on this high-stakes journey into the language of risk. It has been an absolute masterclass unpacking this with you.
Truly a pleasure. Stay curious, deeply analyze your risks, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
Until next time.